So I'm going to review the data structure, and then I'm going to do some quizzes. I think I already looked superficially on this last time that I streamed. It's basically the same as the array implementation, pretty much. And the only difference is this encoding here. Ask ChatGPT about the implementation. Now open the temporary project that I have. Just compile and go to the definition. I think here is saying that it's gonna be an infinite loop because I think when an integer overflows, it it wraps around to the lowest value, which I think I agree with. So I'm gonna see, I'm gonna change, I think, the code there. Nice here, and then what the unwrap bar is gonna do, if if it does overflow, it's gonna just cap the value, I think, or yeah, just gonna stay with the minimal cap. And this checked mu is used on the other examples as well. I think it's just a safer way to multiply in Rust. So let me. It's also saying some stuff. The thing is, like, I'm not really sure if it is necessary to implement the stuff that is saying that I should implement here. Is the graph thing here? Maybe I should just put there, but I think this is when you want to implement custom behavior for the references of whatever struct you're implementing, or maybe trait as well. You just copy and put here. I think I could do an empty trait, I guess, but I want to see what GPT says about this. Maybe something like this works. Hmm. So I would have to put the type on the trait. I understand this. This is one confusion. I think the name is associative types. I understand this better now. The purpose of having this is so that you're not forced to put the type on the entire implementation or trait. And it is usually used for returning. So for the type of the value that you're gonna return. Let's say you want only one function of the implementation to return a certain type. Instead of forcing the entire implementation of having a generic type, then you do this type thing here inside of the thing. It allows you to only have one type. And then the way that it works, I think, is on the trait, you have to specify the type, and then on each implementation, you are allowed to determine what the type is going to be of the return of the function. But here, in this case, not sure why it's complaining. I also don't understand this graph very well, I guess. And so maybe I should do like this. Hmm. Yeah, from some videos that I remember, there was something like this. Like I vaguely remember the pattern being this, where on the base thing, like the traits or the struct, you don't make it equal to anything. But then when you implement, you give whatever type you want, I think. Hmm. So I'm not 100% sure if I understand the type of error. I think I kind of get it, but I'm not really sure how to solve this. Rust yet. So it's basically saying that the size is undefined because the string can be anything. And here you're basically assuming that the string is going to be a UTF-8, but then if someone uses the function and passes a different kind of string, they're going to have different values, different lengths. And because they have different lengths, they can lead to undefined behavior. The compiler is telling me to enforce the size, I think. I'm not really sure how to say this. I'm not sure if they mean that I should do like this. That doesn't make sense. I'm not sure if I should do S. But I don't think that makes sense either. The question is whether or not I'm gonna ask first about the first error, ChatGPT, and then try to solve progressively. Because like this is one of the things that is kind of hard to understand. Not really hard to understand, but it's kind of confusing to get used to, I think, in the beginning. So like this dref, I assume it works in the same way that the drop works. They are implementations, or they are probably traits. A trait is like an abstract class interface. It's like an empty template that you use, as far as I understand. I think maybe it could have definitions as well. I think usually the way that people use traits is like an empty template. So it defines what kind of functions you want. And then when you implement the template, you can define the definitions for the functions. So I think that the Rust built-in either standard library or the built-in on the language itself, the core of the language, but it's probably the standard library. They have these traits, these default traits, and one of them is the drop, which determines what happens when you drop. When an element goes out of scope, determines how the memory is freed. So you can implement this yourself for your own structs, and it allows you to define custom behavior or whatever you want to happen when the struct goes out of scope, or when the value goes out of scope and the memory is deallocated. So assume that the deref is the same thing, but it's for when you're going to dereference the whatever struct you are implementing. But I'm not really sure. So it's saying here that I should, so it is from the standard library, so it's probably just putting there is gonna solve like this. Yeah. So I do think that it comes from the standard library. Maybe this, yeah, but it's weird that this one doesn't. Maybe it comes from this one. Could be. Now I'm not really sure if it's worth it to ask ChatGPT about the size stuff. I think I'm gonna ask because it has to do with the associative types. Was something that I was confused by. I'm gonna review very quickly these functions first. I think the capacity probably right. Just very similar to the vector one. Basically the same thing. From UTF-8. into functions from the external library, so it's probably correct as well. I'm not sure if it is that much, if it is worth it to have this as an exercise, but I'm just gonna leave it here. I'm not gonna look too much into this. Maybe some other time or another time that I'm doing this exercise specifically, I dive deeper into these functions. It's very similar to malloc, I think, on C or C++. Basically, and it's the same idea as the array or our vector actually. So it just moves the pointer to the last to the last address of the vector, and then it copies the string probably as the source. It's very easy to understand. Same thing here is gonna grow by twice the amount whenever it hits the limit of the capacitor. Basically exactly the same as the vector. Same thing here as well. So it's basically everything is basically the same as the vector implementation. The only difference is that it uses the string functions to convert the bytes into UTF-8 or to encode the bytes into UTF-8. And I can dive deeper. And maybe I think I am gonna ask the question about the implementation of one of this function here. Because usually when I see this type of stuff, it's always very confusing to understand how it works. So I'm curious about the numbers here, the hacks, like why use this specific values here to do the encoding. But first I'm gonna get the error again, then ask ChatGPT about it. So it uses this here. Yeah, so I guess I answered my own question there on the prompt because I realized that probably what's happening is that the default trait's gonna use the things that the compiler's complaining about, and that's why. I guess if I do the same thing, I'm gonna copy and not inherit from this. Not sure if this is an inheritance. I think it's like a type declaration, but I don't understand this very well. I'm gonna ask as well for ChatGPT. Let's see what happens. Hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Now it works. So what does that mean? Obviously, I think the explanation there that GPT gave is pretty simple and it makes sense. But I'm trying to understand what are the implications of this. It's basically saying that the compiler requires you to put the size because if you don't have the size, then it can lead to undefined behavior because you're essentially dereferencing a pointer. I think that's what it means. So if you don't have the size of compile time and you dereference, you can be assuming that you're gonna have less or more memory than you actually have on the place that you are dereferencing into. So I think that it makes sense. And this is, like I said, so that you don't force the entire trait to have the sized or sized type, I think. That's the reason why you use the type inside. Not sure if this is something you can do though. If you do like this. So you could do it like this, I think. I'm not sure if you need to put this thing here. But then if you do it like this, then you force the entire trait to have this type when you use it. That's why you use the associative type instead. I think that I want you to understand what is the relationship between types, because when I read this, I assume that you are saying that this type target is going to be whatever implements the sized type. I'm not really sure if it's like an inheritance relationship where it's narrowing the scope of what targets can be to only the sized type. I think that wouldn't make sense. So I think what makes, because then obviously you wouldn't be able to implement string with this, or yeah, or make it equal to a string here. I think that this is basically saying that target can only be something that implements the sized. I think this is a trait, or the size trait. Yeah, I'm not gonna dive too deep into this, I think, because I'm planning, once I have reviewed all the solutions, I think I'm going to just dive into the Rust C compiler source code or the Rust analyzer source. Then maybe I just spend like a separated amount of time dedicated only for this instead of doing here, where I explore the built-in functionality of the external library and the Rust language itself. I think that might be interesting. I'm just gonna remove, I'm gonna continue. I'm probably gonna do quizzes now. So this is like a static cast or dynamic cast, I think. Just changes the type. Do you remember? I'm gonna ask before I do quizzes about the macros. Or maybe I should spend. I don't really like reading on the source code, because this is low. Maybe I should spend some time reading the thing here. And the thing about it as well is that it's not really what's going on. It's just like an explanation of what's going on. So I can't really see. I prefer a lot more, obviously, just looking at the code to see what's actually happening, not the explanation that someone is giving of what's actually happening. So like these kinds of things really annoy me. In Python is basically the same thing. You have functions that don't really have the definition on the file, and it's not easy to find them in any way. It's just like whenever there is these types of things, it's just very suspicious. We're just gonna mark this as reviewed, then move on to the quizzes. So if I understood this correctly, what he's saying is that a macro is something that allows you to use Rust language to implement additional instructions. It's basically giving you access to the Rust syntax and semantics, I think, to allow you to build more Rust code with it. But this stuff is different in the sense that it doesn't give you more Rust code from it. It's just a part of the compilation. So it's as if it is additional instructions or part of the language of the compiler. It's not part of the syntax, I think, or part of the semantics, or maybe both. It's not something that is running an algorithm to generate more Rust code to then translate that into machine code or into intermediate language. Is something that it is itself parts of the intermediate representation or part of the language, part of the abstract syntax tree or the syntax or both that generates intermediate code based on it. So like the logic itself doesn't exist in Rust for this stuff. It exists on the LLVM level. It's the intermediate representation of the language. So that's why it doesn't have the definition, but Rust understand what it is because it's part of the compilation process. That's how I understand this. Then it's saying that if you want to understand this, you have to look into the Rust compiler or use the Rust analyzer. But here, I don't think that you can go just just using F12. Because if I press F12 here, it doesn't go anywhere. And the reason why they do it like this is because these things violate the Rust language. So that's the reason why you can't use a normal macro, because the normal macro just produce you would produce more Rust code. So I think it's almost as if the macros allow you to use the existing Rust rules of the language, like the types of tokens, an expression, or a statement, stuff like this, to build additional language, like a meta thing, meta programming. And these types of patterns here, they are as if they are additional rules that expand the language instead of just working inside of the rules of the language. I think that's how it works. But whatever, I'll spend more time on this some other time, I think. Because the obvious question is why did they do it like this? That's what I'm thinking now. I guess it kind of like I can assume why, I can guess why they did it like this, obviously, because this is like one of the situations where you want to break the rules. And it makes sense because of nuances. So it's kind of like when you are seeing a data set and have outliers, you have to create circumstances for the outliers, but you don't want to make that part of the whole thing, the structure of the language, because then it's just gonna incentivize a bunch of mistakes. It's kind of like one of the exceptions to the rules. That's why I think it exists in the middle, or in this like blurry space between the language and the intermediate representation. Maybe this is interesting thing to ask now. Basically, what I'm saying now. Yo, what's up? What's Rust? Rust is a programming language. Not sure if I understand. I think it made me a little bit more confused, this response. Something I'm not sure about these quizzes is whether or not they are always starting on the same order, and I think they are. So I might have to change them, because otherwise I'm just gonna be doing the same ones over and over again, which is obviously not good. So this one I think I remember by memory, but I don't really remember why. I think it's an error. So I think it is assigning twice here the value. That's probably why it's an error. So like this goes here, and this is the thing that I was saying about macros. So I think macros allow you to use the tokens of the language to build additional commands, I think. But according to ChatGPT, it's different than macros from C or C++ because it's more capable. I think what this does, it takes the identifier and the expression you pass to the macro. So here, identifier would be x, I think, and the expression would be y equals s. Then it's going to replace them here. So this will become that mute x equals y equals s. So it's basically assigning s to y and then assigning y to x. And I think that's the reason why there's an error, probably. Because I think it's the double free or something like that. I don't remember the reason why, but I think it's an error. Either a double free or an undefined behavior. That's because it's a known owned string. S is an owned string, then the first binding to x moves s, and the second binding to y is invalid. Because you're trying to I'm not sure. I think the explanation is correct because I converted this from the Rust book, but it's kind of confusing. Because in my mind, it would make more sense for the S to be moved to Y first, the ownership to Y, then from Y to X. But then, hmm. So the question is, what happens when you have like this expression? Maybe you should ask ChatGPT this, clarify as well. Ask the other LLMs also. I'm contemplating what happens when you have this, because I think that's what's happening here. So obviously, like, it's more intuitive for me to think that it's gonna first assign S to Y, and then it's moving the ownership of S to Y, and then you try to move the ownership, well, try to move the ownership of S to X after. Then wouldn't it be moving? Wouldn't it be the same as moving the ownership from Y to X? That's the thing that I don't understand. I think I'm gonna ask ChatGPT this because it's a little bit unclear. Based on the explanation of the quiz, I think it's more like it's trying to assign S to both variables. And then you can't have that because in Rust, you can only have one owner for a variable at a time. But I think that's in the beginning is probably smarter to go slower on each thing. It feels slow in the beginning, but then like make sure you understand each concept, and then it's just repetition of the same concepts later. I think it feels very slow in the beginning, and then it becomes very fast later once you truly understand. So I think it's probably better to not do that many quizzes in the beginning and just focus on truly understanding the fundamentals behind everything. Yeah, so this is the thing that I was confused about. So if it is like this, then it makes more sense. But I don't understand why it is like this. I think it's because of the star operator here. So I think that's because they are separated by a comma. This is the part that I'm not. The syntax is kind of is it's kind of intuitive, but at the same time very confusing. Like this, because you can imagine that this is just gonna be like is declaring a variable I that is gonna be an identity, I think, or identification, or however you say this, and then declaring the variable E that's gonna be an expression. And since they are separated with a comma here, it seems that this is basically like declaring a function that accepts two arguments, and then it's just gonna replace. But it's not really the argument. That the difference between this and a function is that the function will receive the argument, and this is receiving the type of token that it would be on the language. So the way that I parse this in my mind is like as if this is gonna be X because it's receiving X first here, and then this whole block, including the star here, is gonna be Y equals S, and that's why in my mind it makes more sense to have like the one line declaration. But according to ChatGPT, is not what's happening. They're just gonna create two lines, as it says there. But I don't understand. I think that is because the star operator means that repeat however many times necessary, or something like this. So it looks like it's gonna be, and I think based on the answer of the quiz, that makes sense. It assigns to X first, and then it tries to assign to Y, but then it creates two owners. Because X is already, like, this makes more sense from the quiz response perspective, so I think that this is probably the correct way to think about it, but I don't understand how the macro becomes this. So it's saying that the star means repeat the enclosed tokens once for each matched identifier. But it's still confusing, I'm gonna ask you. So it's matching. Oh, it matches X and Y first as the identifier. I think that's the confusion. And then it matches S as the expression. Yeah, I understand. So the confusion is that I was thinking more that it works like a function, but it parses the whole thing at the same time, like the whole expression. Is more similar to a regex, I think. Uses the, I think that this is probably regex language here, but that's what it's saying. It's gonna try to parse, and I think it does from left to right, the entire thing, regardless of what you have here, and it does so from Rust's perspective. So the identifier X and Y are identifiers, and they are separated by a comma. So this star is saying to match everything that is an identifier and is separated by a comma. Is up to here, and then encounters the equal, which is an exact match. And then the S is an expression. That's how it parses. Still kind of confusing. Because then if it is that way, why does it become like two assignments here? I think it's just because of the way that it's structured. So it's gonna capture that. Hmm. Yeah, it's very confusing actually, because then like why wouldn't be let X and then a comma here? Or X, comma Y. Like this. Why wouldn't it be like this here? Because this again is going to match everything that matches is like a greedy match, I think. But I don't understand very much. I kind of get it intuitively what it means there, but not the details of and the mechanics of how it actually works. That's the thing. But it doesn't make sense. Like this jump here doesn't make sense. It's capturing the variables. So this first phase here, I think it just captures the variables inside of the expression you pass. So it captures y and x based on this pattern. Then it captures the s in this pattern, in this variable here. Then it's just gonna replace as many times as necessary. That's why it creates two statements here, because it has the star here. Or the asterisk, or however you say this. I think I understand now. It captures x and y, the I on this variable, and then it captures s on this, and then it replaces twice because it has two variables. but it would replace as many times as necessary, I think. But it's still kind of confusing. Yeah, I think I'm gonna stop here. So next time, I'm just gonna continue doing these quizzes and continue following the list here of data structures. Next one's gonna be ring buffer. I'm just gonna analyze the solution, ask ChatGPT what it thinks, try to verify myself if I think it is correct or not. I'm gonna do this for all of these data structures that I have here, and then do quizzes later. So see you next time.